Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I will take an in-depth look at, thoroughly analyse and give my own unique opinion on the first Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark. The 1980s was a fantastic decade for action cinema, and it was where some of the most famous and long-lasting action movie franchises began. Mad Max, Rambo, The Terminator, Lethal Weapon, Die Hard, and many more. However, if one action hero defined the 1980s, and a lot of my childhood, it was Indiana Jones. Portrayed by Harrison Ford, or Indy as is known to his friends, was an idea conceived by Star Wars creator George Lucas as a throwback to the classic adventure serials of the early 20th century. In 1977, during the opening weekend of his first Star Wars film, Lucas and Steven Spielberg were on holiday, partly to escape the news as he was afraid the film would flop. Spoiler, it didn't. And Lucas told Spielberg about his Indiana Jones idea, and they agreed to make the film together. Many actors were considered for the role of Indiana Jones, and Tom Selleck was actually cast, but had to drop out due to scheduling conflicts with his TV series Magnum P.I. Harrison Ford was cast, and the rest, as they say, was history. Raiders of the Lost Ark was released in 1981, and was the most successful film of the year, making over $300 million. Indiana Jones soon became a cultural icon, and the film is now considered one of the best action-adventure movies ever made. Today, over 40 years after its release, has time been kind to Raiders of the Lost Ark, and does it still hold up today? Let's take an in-depth look and find out. So the movie begins with the Paramount logo dissolving into a real mountain, as we see several men walking through the jungle. The Paramount logo dissolve, by the way, would become a series tradition, and a unique way of opening each movie. Not unlike the gun barrel shot and logo that opens the James Bond movies. Despite Raiders' reputation as being a fun action-adventure movie for the whole family, the tone of this opening scene is actually quite dark. Most of the men in this group appear to be tense and scared, and we don't get a good look at their leader. Indiana Jones' appearance is teased to the audience, and his face isn't revealed until suddenly one of the men draws his weapon. It's a fantastic introduction to the hero of the movie, Indiana Jones, played by Harrison Ford. What I've always found interesting is that Indy's introduction here is almost like what you'd expect to be from a villain. The cinematography is very dark, and the way the character is lit almost entirely in shadow makes him look very threatening. Also, the famous Indiana Jones theme by John Williams is not used yet, and the music along with everything else here is also very dark and menacing. Steven Spielberg was a big fan of the James Bond films, and always wanted to make one. Clearly, Indiana Jones was he and George Lucas's answer to 007. Just as the Bond movies opened with a mini-adventure, what we have here is similar. Indy is on a mission to retrieve a golden idol. Indy and his only remaining companion enter a cave and encounter spiders and various death traps. These are all elements that will appear in different forms in all the Indy movies. It's all very creepy stuff, especially for a movie that was marketed for being a light-hearted adventure film for the whole family. Are you having fun yet, kids? Anyway, after using his whip to traverse a deep pit, Indy and his companion Satiopo enter a huge chamber and find what they're looking for: the golden idol. Indy, realizing the place is loaded with booby traps, makes his way carefully to the idol, takes out a bag of sand he brought with him, and switches the sandbag for the idol. This is a sequence I've seen parodied so many times in various spoofs over the years, but despite that, it's still a very tense scene. Anyway, it turns out Indy misjudged the weight of the idol, and the place starts crumbling all around him. Dodging poison darts, Indy's betrayed by Satiopo and left for dead.
No time to argue. Throw me the idol, I throw you the whip. Give me the whip! Adios, señor.
Out of options, Indy leaps to the other side of the pit and just barely makes it, only to find Satiopo forgot about the traps they saw on the way in and was impaled to death. Indy is then chased by a massive boulder, which is one of the most iconic images of the film. Harrison Ford performed the stunt himself, and in one shot you can see him nearly stumble, which wasn't scripted. Ford himself says that if he hadn't recovered so quickly, he would have been in big trouble. Anyway, Indy escapes the cave, only to find a tribe of natives waiting for him, led by his old enemy Belloc, played by Paul Freeman. After handing over the idol, Indy makes a run for it, while Belloc is distracted, leaving him to laugh like a madman.
Now that's a maniacal laugh!
So Indy runs like crazy, dodging spears, arrows, and poison darts, and comes across his friend Jock, who is waiting by a plane. Indy swings on a vine into the river, and it's here where John Williams uses the heroic Indiana Jones theme for the first time. Indy and Jock make their escape, only for Indy to find Jock's pet snake in his seat.
There's a big snake in the plane, Jock!
It's a pretty funny end to the opening sequence, which tells us everything we need to know about Indy. He's an adventurer and tough as nails, but he's also got hang-ups and makes mistakes. Harrison Ford is immediately very appealing as the character, and it's a great way to start the movie. So the movie then moves to a college, where we see that Indiana Jones is not just a tough adventurer, but he's a professor of archaeology and is teaching college students. It's a really extreme transformation from the way the character looked like in the beginning. To make a superhero comparison, this version of Indiana Jones is like the Clark Kent to the Superman we saw in the opening sequence. It's here where we are introduced to Indy's friend and museum creator Marcus Brody, played by Denholm Elliott, whom we learn Indy was trying to find the idol for. Marcus then tells Indy they have a meeting with some government officials, and it's here where the main plot of the movie is established, as the agents tell Indy about how a former mentor of his, Abner Ravenwood, is somehow connected to the Nazis. Indy figures out that Abner is working with the Nazis to find the lost Ark of the Covenant. The agents then recruit Jones to find the Ark before the Nazis do. George Lucas has often spoken about how every movie has a pointer scene, a part of the film which explains the plot and motivations of the characters. This is clearly a great example of that. And while some see these scenes as boring exposition, I really like how this one is conveyed. It clearly states the main objectives and stakes of the plot, and on a character level, shows Indy's passion for archaeology. John Williams' score introduces the Ark theme, which will be very important later on, and I also really like how they show how proud Marcus is of Indy as he explains the Ark to the government agents. Marcus, despite only being in a few scenes in the film, is a very memorable character, and in a way is a true father figure to Indy. So we then transition to Indy's house, where Marcus visits him and tells him he's been given the go-ahead to find the Ark before the Nazis do.
You did it, didn't you?
They want you to go for it.
Oh, Marcus!
As Indy packs his gear and gets ready for his journey, we learn a little more of the troublesome backstory between him and his mentor, Abner Ravenwood, that was implied in the previous scene. It's also here where we get the first of several scenes foreshadowing the danger of the Ark itself. Indy, despite his passion for archaeology, is portrayed as a bit of a cynic. This is actually important to his character arc, as it plays a big part in the climax. More on that later. So Indy takes a plane to fly to Nepal, which begins what will come to be known as one of the great traditions of the Indiana Jones movies. I have a montage of Indy's journey outlined by a red line on a map. This is usually an opportunity for John Williams to let his score take centre stage. We then transition to a bar in Nepal, and it's here where we introduce the leading lady of the film, Marion Ravenwood, played by Karen Allen, where we see that she can take a lot of drinks and stay relatively sober. This is a really fun scene that not only sets up her drinking competition with Belloc later on, but also establishes her as strong and independent. I really like the framing here as Indy comes back into her life. Indy is only seen as a shadow for a few moments. It's a very artistic way of conveying the somewhat dark history the pair have. Clearly, Marion hasn't seen Indy in a long time, and she's absolutely delighted to see him again.
I need one of the pieces your father collected.
I learned to hate you in the last 10 years.
I never meant to hurt you.
I was a child. I was in love. It was wrong and you knew it.
Wait, what did she say?
I was a child. I was in love. It was wrong and you knew it.
Now, I just want to briefly discuss this scene as it's been misinterpreted lately in a few online articles I've read. Some have claimed that Marion's dialogue here implies that Indy had an illicit affair with a minor. In 2015, the media website Polygon reported on an unsubstantiated transcript of the 1978 story meetings between the film's creators. Allegedly, in the transcript, George Lucas suggests a backstory in which Marion was as young as 11 or 12 when she engaged with a relationship with an adult Indiana. Steven Spielberg has shot down the idea of Marion being that young. It's been claimed by others that Marion was between 16 and 18, which is of legal age in some states of the United States. Indy was most likely in his mid-20s, so is it questionable? Maybe. My opinion is that this is all complete nonsense. In real life, Alan is only about 8 years younger than Harrison Ford, and he was 38 at the time of filming, meaning she was about 30. So it's not a questionable age gap at all. Alan herself has also said that the dialogue in the scene has been misinterpreted. Anyway, Indy asked her about a medallion belonging to Marion's father that could lead to the Ark. Despite offering a large sum of money, Marion is reluctant to help. Once Indy leaves, we see that Marion has a medallion on her, and again we get a hint of foreshadowing as the wind picks up in a rather spooky fashion. As Marion starts closing up the bar, trouble arrives in the form of a bunch of rather unruly looking fellas led by a Nazi named Toth. He's never actually named in the film, but that's what he's listed as in the credits. He's played here by Ronald Lacey, and he's extremely creepy. Turns out they are looking for the same medallion Indy is, and there's real tension in this scene, as initially Marion doesn't seem intimidated, but she soon remembers she left the medallion on a table nearby. Toth decides to take a more violent approach, and has his men grab Marion and threaten her with a hot poker, only for Indy to arrive just in time and a big shootout takes place. This scene is extremely violent and brutal. In an unusual move, this entire action sequence is not scored by John Williams, so there's a real meaty sound to all the gunshots, and highlights how well the sound design is in this film. We get the iconic moment where Indy is nearly burned on the table, and we get one of the most vicious kills in the film as Indy shoots a guy right in the forehead with blood pouring down the guy's face. Are you having fun yet, kids? Toth, rather foolishly, picks up the medallion despite it being near hot flame and gets his hand toasted. Screaming like a madman, he runs off without the medallion. A plot point that will be important later. An Indy and Marion escape just as the bar burns down. Marion, her livelihood burning to ashes in front of her, decides to join Indy on his quest for the Ark, and the two head to Cairo to meet Indy's contact Salah, played by John Rhys Davies. Salah is an old friend of Indy and is one of the best characters in the film. It's here where Indy finds out that his old enemy Belloc is working with the Nazis to find the Ark. We also yet again get another scene of foreshadowing, this time from Salah.
The Ark. If it is there, Tanis, then it is something that man was not meant to disturb. Death has always surrounded it.
I don't know about you people, but I'm getting the slight impression that the Ark should probably stay buried. Marion makes friends with a chimpanzee, which seems rather friendly, but again turns out to be another plot point which becomes important later. We then move to the streets of Cairo, where Indy and Marion are shopping for supplies, where Marion teases Indy about why he hasn't settled down yet. The chimpanzee runs off only to turn out to be, and as ridiculous as this sounds, a spy for the Nazis. It even gives a Nazi salute.
Yeah.
So then we get another big action sequence as masked assassins attack Indy and Marion on the streets of Cairo. The two get separated, and this part of the movie is full of sight gags, like a rather silly moment where Marion brings a frying pan to a knife fight.
Right.
Indy looks around desperately for Marion on the streets, and I've always found it funny how the extras in the background here are clearly just going back and forth, especially this guy over here, who looks directly at the camera. It's here though that we get by far the funniest sight gag of the movie. The crowd parts and a massive swordsman appears, twirling his blade. It looks like Indy is going to have a big fight with this guy, and then this happens. Never gets old. Amazingly, this scene came about partly by accident. Indy was supposed to have a big fight scene with the swordsman, but Ford got very ill during filming, and they decided to cut the scene altogether, with Ford suggesting that he should just shoot the fucker. So Indy finally spots that Marion is being carried away by a bunch of thugs in a basket and gives chase. As the basket is loaded onto a truck and begins to make its getaway, Indy takes out the driver with a rather brutal headshot. The second one in the movie in as much as 10 minutes. But the truck crashes and explodes, which means that Marion is apparently dead. Indy then decides to drown his sorrows with drink, only for a few Germans to lead him into a bar where Belloc is waiting.
Belloc.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jones.
I ought to kill you right now.
Got a very private place for a murder?
Clearly, Belloc has never seen Star Wars.
Yes, I bet you have.
Sorry about the mess.
This scene between Indy and Belloc is one of the more interesting ones in the film. Belloc in a way is a darker version of Jones and is very aware of that fact.
You and I are very much alike. Archaeology is our religion. Yet we have both fallen from the pure faith. I am a shadowy reflection of you. It will take only a nudge to make you like me, to push you out of the light.
The key difference is that Belloc really does believe in the power of the Ark, while Indy is much more cynical, and is, if we're being honest, only interested in its historical significance and the financial rewards it will bring. It's pretty obvious that this is all a trap, as we can see guns being handed out, and Indy, possibly as a result of grief mixed with alcohol, goes into I don't give an F what happens mode, and goes for his gun, only to be saved by Salah's kids. It's here where Indy gives Salah the bad news that Marion is dead, and clearly, Salah is just absolutely devastated by this news.
Marion's dead.
Yes, I know. I'm sorry. Life goes on, Indy. There is the proof.
We then move to a scene where a friend of Salah's transcribes the markings on the medallion, and they learn that somehow Belloc and his crew have a similar medallion to the one that they have. This is a great example of an exposition scene being very tense, as we the audience know that the data Indy is about to eat have been poisoned. We also get more ominous foreshadowing of how dangerous the Ark is when the wind picks up, as a warning to not disturb the Ark is transcribed off the medallion. I don't know about you people, but I'm getting the distinct impression that the Ark should probably stay buried. So anyway, Indy and Salah infiltrate the Nazi dig site disguised as workers. Knowing the Nazis are digging in the wrong place, Indy goes into the map room equipped with the medallion and the properly sized Staff of Ra. We find out soon after that the Nazis got the incorrect measurements from Toth's burned hand. This whole sequence in the map room is one of my absolute favourites of the film because it's just purely cinematic. There's no dialogue here, and it's an example of great storytelling being conveyed through visuals, and especially John Williams' fantastic score, as he gives a fully developed rendition of the Ark theme as Indy locates the true location of the Well of Souls, where the Ark is kept. It's here where I think I should bring up a very famous episode of The Big Bang Theory, where Sheldon's girlfriend brings up that supposedly Indy has no real bearing on the story.
Indiana Jones plays no role in the outcome of the story. Like, if he weren't in the film, it would turn out exactly the same.
I see your confusion. Now, you don't understand. Indiana Jones was the one in the hat with the whip.
The only reason the Nazis are digging in the wrong place is because Indy stole the medallion and was digging in the right place.
If he weren't in the movie, the Nazis would have still found the Ark, taken it to the island, opened it up, and all died. Just like they did.
While a lot of this is really funny, I have to say there's a very good reason why Indy is actually extremely important to the story, which I'll get to later on in this video. After a close call with some Nazi officers, Indy and Salah make their way out of the camp, only for Indy to walk into a tent where, wouldn't you know it, he sees that Marion is still alive.
No way!
After a joyful reunion is cut short by Indy realizing he can't rescue her yet, as it would alert the Nazis and fail his mission, he leaves Marion tied up, promising to come back for her later. Naturally, Marion isn't too happy with this.
Be back to get you.
Indy, Salah and his men find the exact location of the Well of the Souls and start digging. As Indy and his team dig for the Ark, Marion is paid a visit in her tent by Belloc, who proceeds to try to impress her by giving her a white dress. It doesn't take a genius to realise that Belloc isn't just interested in what information she may have about the medallion, and the two get into a drinking session. Marion, of course, is already an established champion at drinking games, and feigns being drunk in a very amusing scene.
What is this stuff, Renee?
She's just about to make a run for it when Toast shows up, and another great sight gag when we think she's going to be tortured, except for this to happen. Meanwhile, Indy and Salah uncover the opening to the Well of the Souls, while a storm rages. Unfortunately for Indy, he finds out the cavern is full of the things that he hates the most.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
You know, at this stage, I'm getting a really subtle impression that disturbing the Ark may not be a good thing. I've always wondered how there could be so many live snakes down there. Supposedly this crypt hasn't been disturbed for centuries. What exactly were those snakes feeding on all this time? Anyway, Indy and Salah come up with a way of making a firewall through the snakes, and they soon discover the crypt and uncover the Ark of the Covenant itself. The reveal of the Ark itself is great, but what's really interesting is a moment that's left unsaid by the two friends as Indy finds the crypt. You get the sense that Indy is only now just realising the significance of what they may have found here. Unfortunately, as dawn arrives, Belloc and the Nazis discover Indy and his group, take everyone prisoner, and Belloc taunts Indy before Toast throws Marion in there with him.
You're about to become a permanent addition to this archaeological find. Who knows? In 1,000 years, even you may be worth something.
Son of a bitch.
Sounds a lot like what the plot of Indiana Jones 5 is going to be. With Indy and Marion now trapped in the crypt, they use their rapidly dwindling supply of torches to ward off the snakes. Indy soon figures out that the snakes are coming in from a separate chamber, uses his whip to break into it, and the pair get separated. Marion stumbles into the next chamber to find a whole bunch of rotting corpses in there. And I have to say, she takes it rather well. Indy finds Marion, and the pair find a way out of the crypt, which leads them to an airfield. If you look closely, you can see a fella lying unconscious. There was a scene deleted here where this guy fainted at the sight of Indy and Marion coming out of the wall, but it was deleted for being a bit too silly. Indy discovers that the Nazis plan to fly the Ark out of Cairo and attempts to commandeer the plane. This begins one of the bigger action sequences of the movie, as Indy gets into a fight with one of the pilots, and then a huge bloody Nazi played by Pat Roach. This is actually the second character Roach plays in the movie. He played one of the thugs in the bar fight earlier, and would play the giant thuggy guard in Temple of Doom. This fight is played for laughs as much as tension. What I've always found interesting is that Indy cheats, and resorts to a lot of dirty tricks. He throws dirt in the guy's face, kicks him in the balls, and bites his arm while the Nazi pretty much fights fair. And you can't help but like him just a little, as he seems to be really enjoying the opportunity to fight someone. There's one moment here where Indy almost gets crushed by a landing wheel that almost resulted in a serious injury for Ford. While all this goes on, Marion takes control of the gun position on the plane and starts shooting Nazis. The fight doesn't end well for the big Nazi, as he gets chopped up by a propeller blade. At this point, I just want to point out that Raiders has the same age rating as Frozen. With the Germans on high alert, the Ark is loaded onto a truck for Cairo, and Indy takes off on a horse after them, beginning what is easily one of the greatest, if not the greatest action sequence in the history of cinema. Indy intercepts the convoy and transfers from his horse to the truck carrying the Ark. From then on, the threat escalates as he fights the drivers, bashes jeeps and motorbikes off the road, and gets rid of the Nazi soldiers located in the back by running them into trees. It's all fantastic stuff, and Indy smiles a lot during it. Don't you just love it when a guy enjoys his job? Things get serious when one Nazi gets a shot in, damaging Indy's arm, only for one remaining Nazi, let's call him extremely stubborn Nazi, gets clever and climbs over the vehicle and gets the better of Indy as he jumps into the driving seat. Taking advantage of Indy being injured, he proceeds to throw him out the front of the truck. Things get even worse as extremely stubborn Nazi accelerates the truck. What happens next is easily one of the most amazing and dangerous stunts ever put on film, as Indy climbs under the truck, makes his way along the undercarriage, and uses his whip to hang out the back and climb back aboard. Indy, quite understandably having enough of Mr. Stubborn Nazi, gets his revenge by bashing the guy's head on the dashboard, and gives him a taste of his own medicine by throwing him out in front of the truck. And it's there that we say goodbye to Mr. Stubborn Nazi as he falls underneath the truck and gets run over. The chase comes to an end as Indy reaches Cairo and drives into a shelter made ready for him by Salah and his buddies.
What else can I say about that truck chase except that to this day it's the gold standard for action chase scenes. Everything from the stunt work, editing, sound effects, and especially John Williams' fantastic score work together in great fashion. So top marks for this sequence.
So Indy then meets up with Salah at a dockyard, where we meet Mr. Katanga, played by George Harris.
As far as underappreciated elements of the film go, Katanga is one of the better supporting characters in the movie. He's not in the movie very long, but he's got a lot of charisma, and is a very memorable character, despite his lack of screen time.
Mr. Jones, I've heard a lot about you, sir. Your appearance is exactly the way I imagined.
The Ark is loaded onto Katanga's boat, and Indy and Marion set sail for England, seemingly out of harm's way. It's here, after so much action, adventure and suspense, that the film finally slows down for a bit, as Indy takes some well-earned rest, as he and Marion's romantic feelings for each other start to rekindle. Meanwhile, down the cargo bay, something sinister is happening.
Do we even need to say it?
The next morning, it turns out Indy and Marion's troubles aren't over, as a Nazi submarine has intercepted the ship. Katanga turns out to be a reliable ally, as he hides Indy while the Nazis board. Marion is taken prisoner, however, as the Nazis search for Jones, but Katanga plays the ruthless pirate and convinces them that he killed him, but is unable to prevent Marion from being taken away. As the submarine leaves, Katanga and his men cheer on Indy as he appears on the outside of the submarine.
And it's here, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that we come to what is probably the biggest plot hole of the film. Just how does Indy survive the submarine trip to the Nazis' base? Surely he'd drown as soon as it's submerged. I've heard some say that the sub doesn't actually submerge, but we do see the German captain to give the order to blow the ballast tanks, which suggests that they did indeed travel underwater. From what I've been able to find out is that originally they shot a scene where Indy held onto the periscope during the journey, which was just above water, but the effect didn't look good, so it wasn't used. Spielberg apparently hoped viewers either wouldn't care or wonder how Indy managed to survive such a journey. I wonder, did he ever actually think that people would be discussing this film in such fine detail over 40 years later? At the end of the day, it's just an unexplained plot hole. Every movie has one. Not even Raiders is perfect.
So the sub arrives at a Nazi base in the Aegean Sea, where Belloc plans to open the Ark before presenting it to Hitler in Berlin. Indy borrows some clothes from a very helpful Nazi.
Stay out!
And blends in with the rest of them as they all travel to the testing site. Indy then shows up, armed with a fucking bazooka, and threatens to destroy the Ark unless they let Marion go.
Jones! I'm gonna blow up the Ark, Renee!
However, Belloc, knowing Indy all too well, calls his bluff, knowing he would never destroy something historically significant.
We are simply passing through history. This is history. Do as you will.
And of course, Indy simply can't do it and surrenders.
This is actually very interesting from a character point of view, because let's face it, by giving up here, Indy knows that he and Marion are most likely going to be executed by the Nazis. One of the most common criticisms of the film is that Indy is pretty much a bystander for the climax. And to bring up the Big Bang Theory episode again, it can be argued that Indy has no significant outcome in the story. I say that is simply not true, as we're about to find out.
So Indy and Marion are tied to a pole as the Nazis open the Ark. Nothing happens at first, as it appears to be just full of sand. But things take a sinister turn as lights and recording equipment blow out, and what looks like ghosts and spirits start coming out of the Ark and fly all over the place. It's here where Indy finally believes in the power of the Ark and tells Marion to shut her eyes and not look at what's going to happen.
Marion, don't look at it. Shut your eyes, Marion. Don't look at it no matter what happens.
Things turn nasty as the spirits take on a horrific appearance and wipe out all the German soldiers with lightning. I've always found it interesting that the Nazi soldiers are given a very quick death, but the ghosts have something special planned for Belloc, Toth and Dietrich. Toth and Dietrich are literally melted to death in extremely grisly fashion, but the best is saved for Belloc. As the Ark finally closes itself, Indy and Marion open their eyes to see that their bonds are conveniently gone, and there is literally nothing left of the Nazis.
As I said before, someone said that Indy is just a bystander here in this climax. But the fact remains that if he wasn't wrong to tell Marion to close her eyes, she would most likely be dead now.
We then transition to Washington, where some time has passed, and Indy is having a meeting with the two government agents from the beginning. He and Marcus Brody aren't too happy that the Ark has been confiscated by the government, and are only told that the Ark is safe and will be studied by
top men.
One recurring theme that runs throughout the Indiana Jones films is that Indy spends most of each adventure looking for a precious artifact, loses it, or it turns out not to be what he expected. He always gets something potentially better in return though. In this case, he may have had the Ark taken off him and not allowed to be studied by the museum, but what's more valuable is standing right in front of him.
We don't know what they've got there.
Well, I know what I've got here.
Interestingly, this last scene between Indy and Marion was a last-minute reshoot. The filmmakers realised that there was no resolution to their relationship, and this scene was quickly written and shot on the steps of San Francisco's City Hall. The final scene has the Ark being boxed up and stored in a massive unidentified warehouse along with tons of other crates. It's a very powerful and ominous ending, as it makes you wonder, considering what the Ark represents, just what else is stored in that warehouse. John Williams' fantastic Raiders theme kicks in, and the movie draws to a close. 40 years after its original release, Raiders of the Lost Ark remains the gold standard for action-adventure movies. Everything from the directing, the acting, the editing, the music, the stunts, and so many more aspects of the filmmaking come together to form a near-perfect movie. As a director, it represents Steven Spielberg at his very best, taking material that could have resulted in a very cheesy B-movie. Just look at any of the endless rip-offs, such as King Solomon's Mines, as a result of how bad this movie could have been, and made a first-class A movie instead.
We'll just never know how well the film would have fared if Tom Selleck had been cast in the role, but even Selleck himself has gone on record many times saying that the best man got the job. What's remarkable is that for such an epic film, is that compared to a lot of today's rather bloated blockbusters, the movie comes in at a running time of just under 2 hours. This is all thanks to some super sharp editing by Michael Kahn. In fact, the original cut of Raiders was nearly 3 hours long, and it really says something that even with an hour of original footage cut, that you never miss it. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then please click the like button, subscribe if you haven't done so already, click the bell for notifications, and let me know in the comments what's your favourite scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Most importantly, I hope you all look after yourselves, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye for now.